whenever we're ready. Are
Yes,
we going to go introduce or no?
we'll do that a little bit later. So we'll
Okay.
just start with the presentation, then we'll get to the discussion, and then we'll do introductions.
All right.
But you feel free to introduce yourself.
Okay. Am I ready?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. It's hard for me to do this without seeing people, but I do see you all. Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Lewis. I am the Director for Climate Equity at Interfaith Power and Light, DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia, or DMV, which doesn't stand for Division of Motor Vehicle. So that is who I am. Let me go to the next next slide. We are today going to talk about the interconnectedness of life, environmental justice, and equity. So I work with an organization called Interfaith Power and Light, DMV, and we work with hundreds of congregations across the DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia area on saving energy, going green, and responding to climate change through advocacy. And that means through going out there and pushing legislation that will enhance our environments. I didn't move forward. You're moving forward for me.
Apologies.
I'll go back. It's okay. You can move forward for me. Move to the
Alright.
next slide. You can do it if you want. It
I was
doesn't
just
matter.
working on the camera bit.
Oh, okay, no problem. So I'm gonna get into a lot of these things that my organization does later on, but we basically work, like I said, with congregations. Because my focus is on environmental justice and on Black and Brown low-income communities, I work primarily on various things, and we have focuses in our organization, and we focus, like I said, interfaith, but we have specific organizers for the Black church, for Hindu Jain community, for Muslim community, as well as Buddhist community. And our director is Jewish, so she kind of organizes a lot of the stuff around the Jewish community. So but we take, I present at every denomination, it doesn't even matter. I'm always presenting somewhere. So these are some of the things we work on. I'm gonna get into a lot of them later, but for now, just a quick snapshot of a few things that we are working on. I'm gonna move forward, okay? And I'll come back to that. So let's talk about the interconnectedness of social, economic, and environmental justice. So when I speak about environmental justice, I am actually speaking about environment, social, economic, because to me, your environment is everything that impacts you. It doesn't matter. Housing, food, air, water, all of those things are environmental. So when I speak about environmental justice, I'm talking about impacts to people's environment, which is everything. So, social justice. Let's talk about that. Let's describe it. So, love Nelson Mandela, who said, "As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequity persist in our world, none of us can truly rest." So, social justice began as a movement. Its roots began in poverty. It began with the haves and the have-nots. So initially focused on the rich versus the poor, emphasizing human rights and in the lives of the least of these, or those disadvantaged. So the concept of social justice is that every group or individual receives a fair share of social economic benefits as well as environmental benefits. Social justice deals with many issues, including all of these things: poverty, refugees, asylum seekers, family law, housing, children. So it deals with a whole bunch of aspects of our lives. What's environmental justice? So, of course, this is one of my favorite people, Majora Carter, a New York urban activist, and that's probably because I'm from Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl. So I lived in New York too for a while. Environmental justice means that no community should be saddled with more environmental burdens and less environmental benefits than any other. That means that if that community is overburdened, that community, it's unfair that one community is more burdened with the harms of these environmental issues and others are not. So that's really the crux of environmental justice from a technical perspective. Just a little bit of history on EJ. EJ's, the concept of environmental racism is really where it started, because Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968 was going to do a march to advocate for Black sanitation workers who were working, and you can't imagine the conditions they were working in. It was before OSHA and any standards. So he was going to do a march, and as you all know, he was murdered, he was assassinated, but the march went on. And it was Claiborne Temple, which is an AME church in Memphis, served as the ground zero for this march and for a lot of civil rights events. And then in 1968, I thought I corrected that. That is incorrect. It is actually 1987, 88 that the toxic waste and race study was done. It was commissioned by the United Church of Christ, Dr. Charles Lee. Dr. Charles Lee was the one who compiled all of the data with the help of our very own Vernice Travis Miller. For those of you who don't know Vernice, Vernice was his researcher and now is like an OG in environmental justice. So if you don't know her, you should. She and he put together this report which indicated that the number one variable for siting of toxic facilities was race. That's the number one variable. Income, of course, is a significant variable, but it wasn't the number one. It indicated, and this particular study was done in 87 and then again 20 years later. And the results were the same. It didn't change, and I guarantee if it was done again, now it would be the same. So what it's basically saying is the placement of these toxic sites, definitely income is related to where they place it, but also race, and race is actually more significant than income. And for those of you educated folks, you understand the significance of these different variables. So that is what it determined. And this was in 82. This was one of the first major protests in Warren County, North Carolina, in which they were bringing toxic waste into their community, and the community laid their bodies in front of trucks. So that was the first time that it was a major protest like that. So just as I mentioned, environmental racism is really what was thought of at first. In 1991, I missed this, the environmental justice principles were written by the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, in which Dr. Charles Stanley and Vernice Travis Miller and a lot of other leaders in that time. And you all, this might be refreshers for you, for a lot of you, but I always go ground everybody in this because they need to understand the history and why we are where we are. Environmental racism was really the concept that was created at that time. Environmental justice came about later because of it being more palatable for people to hear, to be honest. And especially now, right? Okay. So I think I said Majora Carter in a presentation, a previous slide, so I'm going to skip through this. And for those of you, you probably have seen this, I love this. The last part of this slide, which is about justice, is where we're headed. All of the stuff you do before is just about, you trying to help things that already existed. But if you get to the root cause, which is why we say we're doing justice work, because we need to find out what the root cause is so we can fix that, not just if you look at the way these people stand, and in the first two, equality and equity, They're just trying to make it even or make it equal. But justice gets rid of the barriers. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the important thing. It's not just about trying to, give people the opportunity by giving them something extra. It's getting rid of the barrier itself. So environmental justice movement, like I said, began with racism, it began with toxic sites, and today it has morphed into more of a natural, not just the built, but the natural environment impacts on BIPOC and low income communities. For those of you who have ever heard of this, a sacrifice zone, which is unfortunately a lot of communities are what we call sacrifice zones. They're frontline communities, low-income people of color communities, where low-income people of color live, and they're considered hotspots for chemical pollution and other things that hurt the environment, and that's why it is unequal protection and it constitutes environmental racism. This is just an example of, in Maryland, some of the things that's going on. As you can see, the two sites that I'm mentioning here, which is Baltimore City and Prince George's County. The reason why I use these two is Baltimore City's income is about half the average income or household income as Prince George's County. Prince George's County is one of the wealthiest Black counties in the country, but they still have very similar in terms of maybe half of what Baltimore City has in terms of toxic sites. And that's because Prince George's County is a county and Baltimore City is an old city. So, but the fact that they have these toxic sites and these places, this is just an example of how race plays into the placement of these types of sites, okay? I hope to show this if I can. Let's see. Let's see. Are you pressing or am I pressing? If you can try to press.
Let me make sure that the people on Zoom can hear, because I didn't share audio, so.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna stop sharing, then reshare it so that everyone will be able to hear.
Yeah, this is short. It's short, you guys. It's only a minute, but it's an example. And because I'm from Jersey, I had to show something from Jersey. But while we're waiting, it's a go? Okay. All right.
We're replete with examples of certain communities basically becoming warehouses for toxic facilities.
Most of the industrial legacy for the city of Newark lies in the Iron Bound. There's just so many things in a concentrated area that's less than a mile from where all the residents are.
You're not just breathing in one chemical at a time or one pollutant at a time. You're exposed to a barrage of pollutants.
We're the ones that live with the impacts of mass consumption.
People think you need a hurricane to do this. We don't. We just need a day full of rain. And not everyone lives this way.
We're seeing incidents of high levels of congenital heart failure, of asthma, and children having learning disabilities.
I can't call it anything else but a sacrifice zone. A zone that's been deemed these lives don't matter as much.
We can't keep sitting back and letting generations be affected by this.
To create change, you can't let anybody take away your power or your community's power. Mighty, mighty are you bound.
So actually there's a film. It's 30, 40 minutes, something. It's phenomenal. And I know the activists in the film, they've been fighting this fight for years, probably decades. So if we can move on to the next slide. So wanted to say that's an example of a sacrifice zone. I can actually give you examples that are closer to home. In Baltimore, in particular, Curtis Bay has a medical waste facility there. Also, the trash incinerator, as you drive up to New York, you see right on the highway. It says Baltimore, that thing, that plume that says Baltimore, that is a trash incinerator. And we have been trying to shut that thing down. It pollutes about 30% of the pollution that's generated in the air in Baltimore comes from there. It is toxic. That's one area in Prince George's County. Brandywine, which is more of a suburban area, it used to be very rural. It has 3 gas-fired power plants, Superfund sites, coal ash dumping sites. It's completely what we call a sacrifice zone. I can give you many more that are local to us, okay? And the reason we call them that is because they end up using that particular place, since they already have facilities going in there. They just add more. And the community is not as aware sometimes. Or they don't have the power to fight, and they have been fighting for years. So those are what we call sacrifice zones. So my approach to environmental justice is more holistic. As I mentioned earlier, we need a holistic intersectional approach, which includes more things than just the air, the water, a land, because the built environment is impacting us as well. Social and environmental justice are both about human rights. They both focus on issues around poverty, resources, equity, all about, I said, for participation, inclusion, and diversity. Yes, I'm going to say diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I said it. Both are about racism, sexism, and other isms. Both are about power, capitalistic, political, and social power. Environmental justice issues result in social justice issues, which result in health issues, which I should have put there. Okay, so air pollution, industrial sites, toxic water, transit. Transit is a real big issue in environmental justice, although people unfortunately haven't brought everything together. But that is an issue. There's a lot of disparities. Urban green space. We found in where I grew up in East Orange, Newark, in that area, concrete jungle. East Orange was beautiful at one time, but it's changing and has changed over the decades. Lead poisoning, and we're working on trying to get lead out of the water. Guess what? It's not in the water per se, it's in the pipes that are bringing the water to us. And there are a lot of children who are suffering from lead poisoning. Climate gap. Climate is a part of the environment, which is a part of this. So the reason I don't just focus on climate is because it's bigger than just that, okay? Green jobs, there's a disparity in green jobs in terms of, people of color as well as women. I mean, a lot of people are not getting access to or opportunities, so we need to expand those opportunities. The climate gap, let's jump into that. It's a social justice issue because guess what? A disproportionate and unequal impact of climate issues or crisis occurs in areas where the people of color and the poor. They can't leave, or they don't have the money, or they have to wait for the government. And I will just throw an example in there. My family's from New Orleans. My mother and father's from New Orleans, as my mother called it. And all of them had to move during Hurricane Katrina, and they were poor, so they were moved by the government, and they ended up, my entire family ended up in California, in LA, because everybody kind of was like, okay, we're here. So everybody kind of went where they could, right? A lot of people were displaced during Hurricane Katrina, and that's just a major hurricane. If there's flooding and other things like that, as we have had, where do people go? And a lot of poor people You know, California, I do feel bad about the fires and what happened there. But probably a lot of them may have the finances to rebuild or go somewhere else. Some of them may not. So what ends up happening is the poor. They're the ones who end up not having the means, the resources, the credit to get something else. So that's what happens. And, you know, we have to work on resiliency for those communities, because unfortunately the poor suffer the most. This is from the UN, climate apartheid, rich people, they can buy their way out of environmental crisis while the poor suffer. And we see that all over the country. I was gonna stop here, but I can't see you guys. And we can wait till after to take questions unless I was gonna stop here and ask if people had any comments, questions, or could see some relationships between social and environmental issues that impact their communities, but I don't know if we can hear everybody.
We'll be able to hear.
Oh, okay.
And also, if those online, feel free to put answers in the chat and we can read them out loud, or feel free to come off of mute yourselves. Or if you have anything you want to share.
I mean, they're everywhere, so I mean, listing them is hard, but I work with a lot of communities locally here in Prince George's County, and they all are still trying to address legacy issues associated with policies that go back over 100 years and still impacting their ability to live in safe and healthy communities. So,
Yeah. If anybody else has, you can put it in the chat and we can move forward and come back around to this. Because I do want to talk a little bit about the legislative process that just occurred in Maryland and some of the bills that were put forth that did not pass or passed, you know, morphed out way. Okay. So, as I said, I grew up in New Jersey, so you saw what you saw in the film, the video. I live like, you know, I could, you know, that was downtown Newark. I lived in East Orange, which is like literally a mile or two away. When I was little, I used to walk from East Orange to, but that's when you had that energy to walk. You know, well, you know, but it was polluted. That's North Jersey, and as you go to New York, you'll see a lot of pollution, but there's pollution here too, a lot. We can talk more about that. I'm trying to press and it's not going, so you know what, I'm gonna start pressing, I'm just gonna say,
Just let me know.
go for it. Okay, now, so some of the groups, and I wanted to show how there were some people addressing this intersectionality, some organizations. The problem, I'm gonna just tell you what I see, and I've been doing this work since 2011. I've been doing environmental justice work with different organizations, and the problem I see is we don't take a holistic approach. Everybody's focused on their issue. They're focused, if your issue is water, you're focused on that. If your issue is drinking water, you focus on that. Air, even Interfaith Power and Light, what do you think we focus on? Not just climate, but
Energy.
that's it, energy. We focused on power and light, right? You know, so everybody had their own focus. So when I joined, because my previous job, I think it was read in my bio, I've been doing this since 2011. I worked on trash incineration, fighting that, and I worked on water issues. I worked on affordable housing. I've been working with different organizations over the last almost 14 years, and everybody had their focus. The Poor People's Campaign is one of the best focuses because it focuses on everything. It takes, and Reverend or Bishop Barber, I should say Bishop Barber, is leading that campaign from North Carolina. It started in North Carolina on what they call Moral Mondays. But the Poor People's Campaign really is a legacy campaign from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, okay? He led the Poor People's Campaign. Bishop Barber just resurrected it, okay? So they focus on all of these things. I love the platform of this campaign, okay? And you know, at least we have one. There are other organizations that do, but this really did from a and let me just say this from a faith-based perspective, a lot of when you bring people's beliefs into things, when you bring creation into the discussion, people connect better when it relates to something they believe in. Okay. So one of the things that we try to do when we talk to congregations or when we talk to people that have a belief, and as I said, we are interfaith. So we work with people from the ethical society who don't have this faith tradition or faith belief, or from Wicca in their belief system. In fact, someone on our team is that's their belief system. So we don't necessarily look at it from it has to be church or it has to be, you know, something like that. We look at it as your fundamental beliefs. What are your beliefs? And most, if you go across most people's beliefs, you will see that they value creation. We live here. So now they may have different extremist beliefs that don't fit in. And believe me, I'm the way liberal. So I have to like walk that line when I'm talking to a traditional church. I focus on what I need to focus on. I don't focus on their theology that might totally conflict with what I believe. My background and just from a faith perspective is United Church of Christ. So if any of you know that faith tradition, we are way liberal, way progressive, right? So, and some traditions are more progressive than others, but if you focus on commonality, which is the earth is here for us not to, you know, destroy, but actually to help flourish, and we're not doing that. And creation is not ours. We don't own this. So most faith traditions believe that. Okay, tell me if I'm out of time.
No, you're good.
I'm good. Okay.
So
So,
like 10 more minutes.
okay, cool. So this is just one example of a somewhat faith/secular movement that is going on that you can connect with. It's really a great movement. But anyway, let's go on. So just some other things, there's a lot of faith leaders advocating for different things. You could see pictures all over. Last year, last year, we did Souls to the Polls. So we were trying to get, because, you know, of course, we're nonprofit, so we can't tell you to vote for. We could just tell you the issues and who stands for what. So we did what we call Souls to the Polls. We were driving people out. We were asking them to hold signs up, you know, about different pieces of legislation. We pushed various legislation in DC, in Maryland, and we did a whole bunch of stuff around advocating. And just briefly, in the session that just occurred in Maryland session is only from January to April. All state laws are done at that time. 90-day session. That's when the state legislators come together. So there were several environmental justice bills. We kind of got squashed this year, which, you know, either they got, there was one to remove the trash incineration. Trash incineration is not a renewable energy, okay? It's not. I don't know who thought of that. It's renewable because you keep making trash. But if we move the society towards less waste, or what we call zero waste, which means not just recycling, reusing, composting, you know, being more diligent about disposables and not using disposables. we won't have to burn trash, right? There's a lot of ways to reduce what has to be thrown away. So the trash incinerator that is in Baltimore receives what we call renewable credits from, to make it simple, they're considered renewable in our portfolio standards. So we've been fighting that since 2008, since got there, 2011. And this year we had a bill, another bill, but this year we had a bill which was supposed to remove that subsidy from that incinerator, thereby trying to get rid of it, take away its money, right? Yes, they did that. They put this bill in, and it got morphed and attached, just like they do on the federal side, to another bill, which increased gas infrastructure. So we're fighting against fossil fuel. We don't want no more gas. And we don't want them adding gas infrastructure. We don't want them adding gas-fired power plants, because those are pollutants, right? They pollute the environment, and where they're located are in Black, brown, poor areas. We do not want those sacrifice zones. However, they attached an gas infrastructure bill to removing, so it's like, okay, we'll give you some air, but we'll kill you with some gas, okay? And that bill was called the Next Generation Bill. It was done purposely, it was slick. This is what they do on the federal side as well, right? So that bill passed. So we gotta fight for like communities' rights to speak out against where those pieces of infrastructure are gonna be put. So we still have fights ahead of us, but it passed. That was one. Another one was going to make polluters pay for historic pollution. You know, that one didn't pass. We gotta study. Okay, we gotta study. I'm just saying, these are some of the things we've been fighting for. In DC, Healthy Homes, the Healthy Homes Act, I'm gonna talk a little bit about that. Can we move forward? So DC and Montgomery County, we tested over 700 homes that have gas stoves. So we went into their house, we tested it for NOx, which is a toxic gas that is emitted when you turn your gas stove on, along with methane. And 2/3 of the homes had high levels of NOx, higher than what is required or standard for outdoors by the EPA. So there's no indoor standards right now. So you can breathe whatever you want in your house. Anyway, we found this out. There's a report, and I'll share the slides, but there's a report called Beyond Gas DC. I'll share that report because that report is really good. We were publishing this report, and Washington Gas asked one of the news reporting companies to take down the report because it said this and it talked big time. They said it was a mistake, sorry, they let them put it back up, but that's how fearful they are of us knowing and doing community science, okay? And we're gonna use that information as we move forward with other indoor healthy homes things. So in DC, we have this thing called the Healthy Homes Act. It passed in 2024. This act basically is going to help fund or finance retrofitting of old gas stoves and old gas appliance to new efficient induction stoves, electric stoves at no cost to homeowners and renters. So the funding for this, I think part of it was going to come from, you know who, the Inflation Reduction Act, and probably from the Infrastructure Act. So now we're in the budget process in DC, and your guess is as good as mine. We're down there advocating for stuff. DC's is being looked at and scrutinized by, you know who. So hopefully we'll be able to help people not breathe this crap, especially in DC. Maryland, we brought this up as a, something we want to do, but Maryland's still struggling with a lot of other stuff. So, just passing a cumulative impacts bill, which I don't know if you guys know what that I can talk about that later, but we didn't get it through this year. New York, New Jersey, there's quite a few states that have what we call cumulative impacts bill, where we put forth one and we didn't get it through this time, but we will. Okay, let's keep going. Air quality monitoring, we're working with, hey, Siege from the University of Maryland. We put monitors on, purple air monitors on various churches, not only UCC churches and other churches, but we also, my understanding, the AME churches, which I work with, have put monitors on there. So there's great coverage. If you guys ever want to check the map out, you can go to the purple air map, and it'll show you all the purple air monitors in the region. Hopefully we'll be able to use that information as well. Next. Another thing that I just did this weekend, we had what we call NOAA, first of all, funded this project, and it's for climate resilience on the Eastern Shore or coastal areas. Working with North Carolina, Virginia, Interfaith Power and Light as well. We selected Salisbury in Wacomico County to be the area we're going to focus on. So we had our first event last May to just listen to the community, what are their issues. And the reason we looked at that area is because, well, you all know, coastal communities are in trouble. They are sinking. They are having so much flooding issues. They are having salt erosion, and for rural communities, that means loss of land for crops and other things. There's a lot of issues out on the Eastern Shore. So this year, this past weekend, we just had another event, but in which we were talking about flooding as the #1 issue and kind of solutions, and we brought different resources to the table. So now we're working with congregations out there to try to figure out some things they can do and bring funding to them. Nobody paid attention to them really. So we're hopefully bringing our expertise and bringing funding to that area so that they can do, even if they do little projects like rain gardens, like you know, they're like ditching or trenching, or even environmental assessments, and, you know, planting native plants, planting trees. They may have to go further and do drainage systems and stormwater management. So we're trying to bring some resources to the community. I would hope that we get a climate resiliency hub, and I could talk about those, what they are. They're absolutely great. They're happening all across the country, in which like a community center or a church would be a hub in case of a disaster, for different things for the community. But we haven't gotten that far yet. Next. The other thing, just we're working with, there's over 150, 70 congregations that already have solar on their roofs. We don't have, in DC, we have what we call community solar. We have solar in which you can subscribe. That's the case in Maryland too. We do have community solar, but not as many as we want. And that would be for people who live in apartments and they can't get solar on their roof. They could subscribe to this solar array and get a reduced rate for the amount that they subscribe to. Next. This was just a neat slide. I just love this slide. Somebody sent it to me. Myself and Sidra Siddiqui from Washington Interfaith Network did a conversation at Taking Nature Black last month, I think it was, Faith in Action, and we just had some feedback, and we had some whole bunch of stuff, and this chart, this just kind of was neat. They created this for me, and I thought it was neat. I thought it was neat. Next slide. So faith and community leaders need to lead the tables of justice. We need to work together. we need to join different grassroots movements. We need to include things in our sermons when you talk. I mean, I had, it's different working in the faith community to a certain extent, but once you gain trust, then you're working with the community and you bring community members together. And what I say to people is we need to use our time, our talent, and our treasures to fight for justice and equity. Next. Oh, and could you go back one?
Yes.
And of course, Shirley Chisholm, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a chair. Bring a folding chair. Just get there, right? Next. These are some just listed faith-based organizations that are doing work in this area. I want to highlight Beloved D.MD.NoVA Collective. That is a website that I created for Black faith leaders, and there's some resources on there that we've listed a whole bunch of resources that people can go to find grants and funding outside of the federal government, because that's where we're at. Next. Some other local organizations that are not faith-based, but that are working with us and with others: Empower DC, CCAN, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Sierra Club. Out for Justice is small, but they're in Baltimore. Progressive Maryland, Clean Water Action, CASA, Action in Montgomery, Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. South County is new. South County PG Maryland EJ Collective, that's a new one. So I can connect you to the person. Environmental Integrity Project, Blacks of the Chesapeake. So there's so many more. I just didn't put them, but every topic has a person or organization. And I end up being the connector. So next. So I just wanted to thank you for this and share this and say thank you. There you go. All right.
Feel free to ask any questions or in the chat, and we'll have about 5 minutes for questions, then we'll take a quick break.
I have a question. I just want to know more about Interfaith Power and Light and the coalition building that you guys have done. Like, how did you, as an organization, have you always been climate focused? Is it a relatively new focus of the organization, or was it built around the issue of climate justice? And who is a part of, I think that some of those organizations that you listed at the end must be part of your coalition of partners, but how do you, so many issues out there, right? So how do you think about your particular role in the climate justice platform? And how do you organize, particularly at the legislative level? Because you gave a lot of examples of where you're involved in new legislation and pushing legislation. What does your work with legislators look like, and how do you bring the faith community to that conversation as a particular constituency around these issues?
Okay.
I'm sure there's a lot of different
I
parts of
know,
that.
so I'm gonna go back to I think the question was, how do we work? Let me give you a little history. So Interfaith Power and Light thank you. Allergies, you guys.
Yes.
I'm so sure all of you are familiar. Interfaith Power and Light is let me just say this. At one time, there was a headquarters, Interfaith Power and Light, and then affiliates sprung up. So we are an affiliate of a national organization. So there's affiliates in Virginia, there's affiliates in North Carolina, there's affiliates in Georgia. So we're all Interfaith Power and Light, and we're all affiliates, and we focus in our own area. So we're independent, but we are collective. Interfaith Power and Light DMV began 15 years ago about with my current director, who is still the director. So she has been working, and her focus was climate.
Mm.
It was all faith and climate.
Mm.
So she has been working that issue since then. And we do tabling, we go to congregational health, we go to health events, we go here, we speak, we do different things. We also do things like what we call climate in the pulpit. So there's a period of time that we send out to our listserv, and everywhere we go, we get names and emails. So we have over 12,000 folks in our data. We have a big database of people, congregations, and because my fearless leader, although she wants to be called fearless, fearful leader, she has been doing this so long, she knows everybody. She has a memory of an elephant. So she's like, oh yeah, so-and-so over there. So we built all of these relationships over the years by going out and doing things with them, helping them get solar, helping them connect to native plants. So we have a program with the National Wildlife Federation called Sacred Grounds. We help them connect to native plants and grow native. We work with different partners on tree plantings and things like that. So over the years, we've just connected. When I joined, and I've been working with them as a consultant since 2016, but I came on full time in 2022. I think, my focus being environmental justice has expanded the focus of our organization to include more things. Yes, focused on climate emissions, focused on elimination of fossil fuel in our environment. We still are heavily focused on that, but we're also, I'm working with some organizations on lead pipe replacement in DC, as well as it's starting to, unfortunately, before the current situation, that the EPA was requiring that everyone replace their lead service pipes over the next 10 years. I don't know where that stands, but Maryland is just beginning to do an assessment, and so is Virginia, of who has lead, who doesn't, that kind of stuff. DC is ahead because DC pretty much knows, and they have a process. So, but I'm working with Young, Gifted, and Green, Latricia's team, on that issue. We've worked together a lot. There's a campaign for lead in DC, also DC and NAACP. So I've been working with a lot of grassroots organizations. When I came in, my first thing is to go to the city or to the area and say, who's doing what? I'm not going to start anything without the people who are doing the work. So we're going to work there, and then we'll ask where we can fit in. How can we help? So that has been the culmination of where we are now, which is spreading beyond just climate. Okay. And I don't know the second part.
The second part was about your legislative agenda and how you particularly bring the faith-based community
Into that.
into conversations. Are you not just supporting legislation, but also proposing legislation? How do you work with legislators, and how do you bring the voice of the faith-based community?
So because Interfaith Power and Light in Maryland, what we have been, because we've been here so long, we've been focused on climate. We have been brought to the table of the big greens, who were kind of leading the legislation. And so we were kind of like saying, this was before me, saying, how can we help? How can we bring faith leaders to advocate for certain bills or whatever? So we would ask a faith leader to come down and testify or this or that. Now, because we're focused on environmental justice, on bigger things, and we have a person who is called our faithful advocacy lead. And since we're a 501c3, we can't do lobbying, but we can advocate for bills or for particular issues. So the person we have is Andrea Orozco. She is phenomenal. She's from Texas, the Texas legislature. So she knows how to deal with people who are Democratic but act Republican and act vice versa, so she knows how to navigate in that environment that may be hostile to certain things, and, we're in an environment where people are flip-flopping all over the place. So she has to know how to deal with both parties, and she does, and she's really good. So she just came on and has really set us up to be one of the organizations that's asked. So now we have a real seat at the table, when these big greens, because what happens is the big greens lead a lot of Sierra Club, CCAN, League of Conservation Voters, LCV, those are the big guys, Clean Water Action, they have lobbyists, they are bigger. And we were like, kind of follow along, but since I've been there and since Andrea has come along, no, we want our voices heard. So we now have one really small table that I'm really working with, which works with some of the people I listed, Out for Justice, Black Girls Vote, smaller grassroots organizations. So we have a grassroots EJ table now, and we're influencing the decision-making and influencing how these bills are written. But it took time for us to establish ourselves as someone who has, whose opinions are valued, and bringing the faith voice to that. We reach out to faith leaders and say, hey, can you testify? Come, we got, we get reverends to come and testify, or just green leaders, because we also work to help these congregations do what we call green teams or EJ teams, in which they're focused on environmental justice, or green teams. So once they know us, and we pick up the phone and say, hey, you think you can testify? This bill is going to affect you, either where they live, because some pastors pastor churches in DC but live in Maryland, and vice versa, right? So we just reach out to them and say, hey, can you, and a lot of them are like, sure, we'll like write the testimony for them and let them, we'll do all of that. And they're responsive. We just need to relate it to the community. You know what I'm saying? We can't just say, can you testify on something that doesn't make sense? So that's how we get, and we've been successful over the years. That's kind of how we bring these communities, different communities into the game. Is that any other questions, or do you want to take a break?
Right now, there are no other questions online,
Okay.
and you've been talking for a while as well. So I want to give you a chance to take a sip of water, grab some of the food in the back, and I will reconvene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I know I threw a lot at you, so.
Oh, but this is great. And then just another round of applause.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we'll come back at 1:25.
Okay,
Perfect.
let me pull this. Because there's
Well-
quite a few groups.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I'm just interested because we have some faculty who I think are part of Interfaith Power and Light, and then also work on international issues like in the Caribbean, for example, and in Africa. And I mean, climate change is definitely impacting Africa a lot. So and the Caribbean, so and with like USAID kind of going away, I'm wondering like, is that, kind of what is the faith community role in that? But I do know like some faculty members who are similarly, like, I think involved in Interfaith Power and Light in the DMV, but also doing things internationally. So I just was interested kind of like how all the pieces fit together.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely connect because we connect with, like, for instance, denominations like United Church of Christ is that international, United Methodist, Episcopal Church, the Catholic Church. I mean, a lot of them have all kinds of international efforts. So we're connected to organizations that work internationally. And with the loss of USAID, I think people are just still trying to figure out what to do, like how do we help those organizations that were connected to all the organizations that are losing funding? And the challenge is this happened within the first 100 days, so it's still new and people don't know what to do or how to shift. I'm kind of I personally am, I want to say this, am somewhat surprised because we knew the agenda coming in here. We knew it. We knew it in September of last year. And people just didn't believe it. And now they're shocked and stunned that the laws are not being adhered to. So my focus has been on how can I find other resources to help communities and to help congregations and to help people, not just here, but I'm also working, I told you I'm on several boards. I'm working with those boards on looking at how we can find funding that's private funding, because there's a lot of private funding that hasn't been tapped. And unfortunately, we have to change our language. Sometimes we can't, if we're going after certain funders, this new fear of climate, using that word, fear of equity, everything in my title that was.
We can relate. Director.
Yeah, I can relate. Yeah.
Everything in my title. We have to help, and that's why the event I just had on Saturday was faith and flooding. That is a very conservative, traditional part of the state of Maryland. Everybody could agree on flooding. I don't care what your political beliefs are. If it's flood, you're gonna suffer. So that's why I was, and I've been around long enough when climate deniers were just like totally everywhere, and environmental justice was unheard of. So we always used things like that resonated with people, like food. Resonates, air, what you breathe, clean air, clean water. I mean, just saying that instead of saying, as a result of climate change, the sea level has risen, and now people want solutions to the problem. A lot of people don't necessarily want to know why it happened. Does that make sense, Sally?
Oh yeah, no, and I also do that. So like erosion is often
Exactly.
the word. Yeah.
Exactly. Like even resiliency hubs, climate resiliency hubs. What about resiliency hubs? There's still climate caused because if you have, a hurricane or a flood or whatever, you can go to the resiliency hub. Call it what you want. It's dealing with climate disasters, right?
Yeah.
we have to learn how to adjust. And we've always had to do this. It's just
Oh,
people aren't,
yes, I know.
people aren't used to this, but just adjusting your language. Really, we should be talking in 6th or 8th grade level for most people, as you all know. You don't want to talk about mitigation and adaptation strategies. And sometimes you can with the community, but you have to bring everyone to the same level before you say, this is a mitigation strategy or this is adaptation strategy. For example, in Crisfield, which is on the eastern shore of Maryland, if you were to go out 50 and go straight down to the tip, not out to Ocean City.
I've been to Crisfield.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah.
No, if it rains, it pours. It is right on the tip. They were awarded about $36 million, and the Army Corps of Engineers and a whole bunch of different scientists are trying to help them with, I would say, mitigation and adaptation strategies. I don't know how you could mitigate sea level rise. I mean, it's just. Adaptation is probably more. There's a film I'd like you all to check out. It's called Eroding History. And it was done by the environmental, I can't remember, but if you type in Eroding History film, it's free now. We showed this film and it was about a church and a community on Deal Island, which is also out on the Eastern Shore. Deal Island is almost in the ground. I mean, in the ocean. I mean, it's sinking. And there's a historic Black church that was there. And, the graves are, because they used to bury, the cemeteries used to be associated with the churches. So a lot of historic graves have been coming up and, kind of like being destroyed and eroded. And in fact, I tried to go out there to visit and it was raining while the sun was shining. So I was like, that I ain't going. Just because you can get
It's
stuck.
San Remo.
Yeah, but you can get you can get stuck out there, and you can't get back. So a lot of those Outer Banks, those islands are sinking. And so the question is, what do you do? And it's not fair for us to say they should just move
Right,
and lose
yeah.
their history and lose their history.
There's a really good book called Chesapeake Requiem that talks, I think it's Tangier Island. And similar, it's like about that, like the graves are like washing away and then they find like parts of the coffins and
yeah, it's sad. Someone from Smith Island, Smith Island cakes. Anybody heard of Smith Island cakes? Okay, well, so someone from Smith Island came to our event and said they had a 1,000-year storm, a storm that shouldn't have existed. And, the water, they were wading in the water like mid, and I said, well, how did you guys get around? This island is, I don't, 45-minute, you have to get to it via boat. And it's only 200 people left on the island. I mean, and she said, we got around in kayaks. I mean, I'm so sorry, so she came to the event. What do you say to an island that with 200 people on it, they probably don't have any mitigation or adaptation strategy? The government barely pays attention to these people. They've been there forever. So that might be an adaptation strategy. Like, we got to relocate you. I don't know what the solution is for that island. I mean, you can stay on it as long as you can, but we know what's going to happen. So what we did at our last session was we showed maps of today and flood areas and maps of 2050 and how it's going to look. And we mapped out where people live and how things that they know will be gone or underwater, even in Salisbury. which is a little further north than Chrisfield. Chrisfield, I can't imagine how Chrisfield looks. Maybe I'll ask the Union for Concerned Scientists did our maps for us. So we're working with a lot of different people on these issues. It's sad. And I would never tell anybody that they have to move. I would say, let's figure it out. They have to
Yeah,
come
it's
to
up to
that
them.
conclusion. I'm sorry.
I agree. Like they have to make the decision themselves. It's not fair to tell people you must do something. Because
Yeah.
you could just live there in a houseboat or something.
Right. I mean, it when you talk to these people, it's sad. I mean, and it's not even as bad here as it is in like North Carolina and other places. So you got to be strong when dealing here, and you also have when dealing with the community, and you also have to try to be a resource, whatever you can do, whatever you can share.
Well, since no one's, I have one other question, if that's okay.
Go
And
for it.
you talked about how you grew up in Newark. And so is that mainly how you got interested in this work, by growing up in Newark, or was there something else that made you really interested?
So I mentioned Newark, but honestly, I'm going to claim my hometown, which is East Orange, just right next to Newark. But
yeah,
everybody
sorry.
knows. No, everybody knows Newark. They don't know East Orange, unless you're from Jersey. So anyway, the oranges, right? Yeah, you heard the oranges. Anyway, so but I lived in Newark, and I lived in that environment, in that area. In fact, my parents met in Coney Island and lived in New York, and said, let's go to the suburbs. And they moved. They were going to Newark to move. That was the suburbs. So no, that's not how I got into this. I have a background in telecommunications. So I went to Rutgers, got my degree in economics and an MBA, and I worked for the telephone company, what you guys call now Verizon. It wasn't that then. They had just broke up from AT&T. That was at that time. So I was in technology all that time. And then all of a sudden my something happened, and I was like, okay, what am I gonna do? So I went back to school. So I mean, I love school. Okay, I mean, I just love it. I mean, if and when I stop working, I will be back in school. So went to school for a master's in sustainable urban planning. My focus was climate change. Went to GW, absolutely loved it. And you know, I just started looking at the environment in 2011, 2010, 2011, and it was like, what's the next wave? The environment. It was .coms. You guys probably don't remember all of this, but there's always a wave, right? There's always some issue that everybody's like gathering around. And before, way back when, you guys, maybe 20 years ago or so, .coms was, all of these tech companies, but it was like online stuff. Then it was this, then it was that. So, I got into the climate way. I was like, climate is the next big thing. I just know it. And truly, it is. It still hasn't become as big as it should be, for corporations. But started watching this channel, which doesn't exist, called the Green Channel. It was talking about environment. I said, I want to do that. And that's why I decided on getting a degree that focused on climate change, right? And it really took me a while. I've always been interested in justice work, always been interested in advocating for the least of these, for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. So this fell right into my bailiwick, in terms of, advocating for environmental issues and faith. And when Joelle reached out to me in 2021 and said, hey, I got this grant, I'm going to be working on the Black church, on environmental justice, I was like, that's me. She designed it for me. Which is just my passion. My passion is helping people and helping communities. So I ended up doing this instead of helping corporations make more money, because that's what I did for 25 years. You know, I helped, all these corporations roll out new products and services and didn't feel anything after. And then this came and I'm like, wow, this makes me feel good. It makes me, when people come to me and say, I did it. I mean, that just really, so I think this is where I'm supposed to be. And I feel good about helping the community, and especially people who can't do anything for themselves, man. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't know what to do. Love it. Love it. So that's how I came to this. Um, and I would tell anybody who's even has a heart for activism or advocacy or anything, start out part-time or start out volunteering. That's how I started. I started volunteering. I didn't have a job. My job, kind of they laid us off in 2011, and that's when I said, what am I going to do? And I went back to school, and I volunteered. I volunteered at the Sierra Club, and I was like, well, this isn't exactly what I mean, I needed something more grassroots, right? So I found Energy Justice Network, and they were fighting incinerators. So I was like, yeah. And they were willing to pay me $1. So
Remember.
while I was in grad school, I volunteered with little grassroots organizations, Food and Water Watch, which is not a little, but they were fighting to ban fracking. So I was like, yeah, and then I worked to fight fluoride, putting fluoride in our drinking water. For those people who think we should do it, because there's some discussion, there's a lot of studies that show we shouldn't be drinking poison or a toxin. I mean, I don't drink my toothpaste. I spit that out. It has fluoride in it. So I fought, I was the director for an organization that was like promoting not putting fluoride in our drinking water, using it in other ways, but not putting it in our systems. And so I did a whole bunch of different environmental fights. And, I don't, I think for me, what resonated the most was things that really affect the community's health and wellness. And that was one of the reasons why I got involved in so many of the fights that I did. So now I'm fighting for lead pipe replacements. That's a big fight. And we also are fighting against fossil fuel burning. You wouldn't burn coal. Back in the day, we did a whole thing to advocate against fossil fuel burning in the house, meaning gas stoves and gas appliances. And we all wore Flintstone costumes to to an advocacy thing in Annapolis, in front of legislators. And we got a whole bunch of attention because we're walking around saying that burning in your house is like the Flintstones, where they burned, I mean, you wouldn't burn coal in your house anymore. You wouldn't burn wood in your house anymore. Why are you burning gas in your house with toxins? So it's kind of antiquated. That was our point, which is so true. I'm a little bit older than you guys, so when I was young, we did have a coal burning heating system. I remember, like, literally, we burned coal. Could you imagine? I mean, no, probably not. But back in the day, it was acceptable. We didn't know. I mean, people didn't know what they were breathing. People smoked. I smoked. Your parents smoked in the car with kids. With kids. Sent me to the store for a pack of cigarettes, and I was 8. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So when you know better, you do better. And we know better.
Mhm.
So we need to now educate people about the harms of burning anything in our environment, especially with children and, seniors or anybody who has a compromised immune system. So I hope that answers
Yeah,
some
that
of
was
your
really
questions.
interesting. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? Because you mentioned transit equity earlier, and you talked about like that everyone's put the pieces together. I was wondering if you could, because I'm also super interested in transit justice. So I was wondering if you had some like more thoughts about like how that all comes together with environmental justice.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So, of course, some of the main things we need is food, housing, jobs. How do we get to the jobs? It's like, I mean, so a lot of issues we're finding with public transportation is that they're not going to places, or when they're cut, when the bus route is cut, it's cut in Black, brown, poor communities. And there are organizations that are focused mostly on transit, which we need because there's a whole bunch of issues. Let me talk about, there's an organization in Baltimore that's doing a lot of work, Baltimore, Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. And that particular coalition is focused on not only public transportation, going to communities that don't have access to cars or don't. In fact, we want people to use public transportation because we want less vehicles, miles traveled, vehicles on the roads, right? Because of pollution. So, but a lot of transit, like the Metro or Prince George's County, or a lot of it's localized. And if it gets cut to, unfortunately, to communities that don't advocate or can't advocate for themselves. So there's communities in Baltimore organizing around transit. There's communities in Prince George's County. There's another group I mentioned, the EJ Collective. There are communities there. I would say there are a lot of bills that were introduced on transit that the community didn't even know was being introduced. I don't know if you know Prince George's County, but there's a highway called 210 or Indian Head Highway, major issue highway. There was two bills or so being introduced by the legislators there, but the community didn't know and didn't have input into those bills. So there's not a lot as much done around transit, but transit, we know it's unequal. And I'll give you a personal example. So we have a house, my son, he lets mom live with him. I know, he's great. I raised him right. He has a house in Bowie. He has a townhouse there, and he bought another house in Alexandria, Virginia. So in Bowie, there's some public transportation, but not a whole lot. I mean, there's some, but not a whole lot. There's no metro that gets you out there. You have to have a car. But there's a bus or two. In Alexandria, the street that the house is on, it has a bus, a metro bus that comes every hour. Empty. Down the street. I'm like, wait a minute, Prince George's County, you can barely get a bus. You could barely get a ride. In Alexandria, Fairfax County, there's transportation, plus you have the metro. The metro is a mile from my house on off of Telegraph Road, plus there's buses, metro buses. I'm like, but you go in some place like Prince George's County that has 1 million people and has a lot of places, other than the metro stops, the buses are few and far between. And people haven't rose up to say, like Fort Washington is predominantly Black, that area down off of where the harbor is, predominantly Black, predominantly wealthy. I mean, I would say higher middle class or whatever you want to call it. No public transportation, a bus in the morning, maybe in the middle of the day, and one in the evening. You have to drive, and it's a nightmare. And there's no transit coming down there. There's no transportation. That's because the communities haven't really focused on those issues. You need organizations like BTEC, who's also looking at the building of the new bridge in Baltimore, and saying, why isn't there light rail being considered on this bridge? They're not even considering putting a light rail system on that bridge. So you need people that allow, you know, and verbose and boisterous, I should say, about issues around transit. Because if you don't have the community saying something and screaming, you know, then you have what we're getting ready to get, a bridge that has no light rail. I mean, what are we back in, you know, 1980? I mean, you aren't putting light rail? I don't understand. And that's what's happening, but you need community voices in those conversations. So there isn't a big transit. There's organizations in Prince George's County that do, you know, smart goals and smart, but they're not community led. So that's the challenge. Jose keeps getting kicked off. Jose's back on.
Hey, hello.
Oh, hi.
Now that is not Jose, the Jose I know.
It is. My bad. My signal fell.
I didn't know that was you. So Jose and I, before he abandoned us, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Jose and I are on several working groups, several groups on grassroots organizations that are focused on EJ in Maryland. So, hey, Jose. See, you didn't leave. You can't leave me.
There's no way I could leave. Anyone subbing in for Casa yet or no?
No, well, I think, you know, not like you, not consistent and not regularly. And, you know, we've worked with CASA, we work with all kinds of grassroots organizations now. And I think that's the way to go. We have to collaborate. If we don't collaborate and we don't come together as a community, we can't push these bills. We can't and we didn't do that great legislatively in Maryland right now. So.
Yeah, I was keeping up specifically with the whole Next Generation Energy Act. We're guaranteed new gas. I saw that.
I know.
But Robin, if I may, I did want to ask a question, and sorry for not being on for the whole call. I was actually on my solar training. So that's in the works. That's moving. But I wanted to ask you this, in a very transparent way. So a lot of the immigrant community is now finding themselves in North American EJ communities. And the truth is that, and don't shy away from this, but a lot of these communities are historic Black communities in Maryland. For example, let's zone in Maryland. So my question was, as new people, but definitely impacted people, what's the best way for the new immigrant community to interact and most importantly unify and work together with the individuals who have been there for longer?
Well, depending on where they are, I mean, I know you're not in CASA right now anymore, but I love CASA's platform and what CASA does in the community. I think the best way for immigrant communities, because for example, out in Salisbury, we're working directly with the Haitian community out there, because there's a lot of Haitians that moved out to Salisbury to work at where else? One of the, Purdue. Okay. So we're working with the Haitian congregations out there, and trying to support the communities from a faith-based perspective. But I think it's just, Jose, it's about getting engaged in, community, in organizations, community organizations that support the immigrant communities' issues, which are very similar in those communities to other things that are going on. So, the best way to me is to connect with organizations that are working in that community on issues, may not be climate issues, but will be issues that are, address some of the other issues that that community may have. There is nothing, unfortunately, there's nothing out on the Eastern Shore for the immigrant communities other than issues around farming. There are some people who are out there doing that. I always say, look in your community and see who is working in your community, because usually what organizations that are in your community are addressing the issues of the community members, especially communities that have a diverse set of people, because we're all being impacted by what's going on across the country with immigration. All of us, you know, so I think we all have to address it. I mean, we've been asked in IPL to address some issues as well, and connect with congregations who are dealing with immigrants issues right now, because that's my son calling. But so Jose, I'd love for you to maybe share some other connections with me, because I'm being asked this question all the time. And I'd love to hear from you directly. You got my email.
Okay. Yeah, and I totally agree, and that's definitely the way we at Casa try to operate. Always, let's see who's already there. Let's talk with them and build a strategy from there. And how can we help bring up our own issues and work together when appropriate? But yeah, I'll definitely reach out, and we can also catch up.
Yeah, definitely. And also one last thing, we have to get hold our legislators accountable. Our legislators in Maryland are not acting like they should. They're acting like, unfortunately, the federal government in a lot of ways. They're afraid to make decisions. You know, this session was not good for the environment. And it was
Terrible session for the environment.
terrible.
Like,
It was not a
honestly,
good session.
I'm not fooled by removing trash incineration. I'm not fooled by that as like, oh my gosh, what a great bill. I know. Yeah, we lost. We lost.
We lost, so just real briefly, they attached the removal of trash incineration from this, what we call RPS, which subsidizes that incinerator. They removed it from the RPS, but they didn't just do that independently as a bill on its own. They attached it to a poison bill. So it's like, we're gonna take we're giving you what you asked for, but they're also attaching it to a bill that increases fossil fuel infrastructure, which we're totally against. And it's totally against what we stand for. So it was slick, it was deceptive, and you know, I knew something was coming when they agreed to do trash incineration. They didn't just agree. It was because they had something up their sleeve, which was this other bill. So they attached the two, and that's what passed. And that bill also shortened the time that communities can engage. So it was 90 days. And they brought it down to 45. We negotiated some back up to 90, but they shortened the time. And what does that do? That makes, you know, corporations push things through quicker. So it expedites and doesn't give the community enough time to say anything. It is a bad bill all around. It's a bad bill. So
Totally agree, and we tried initial environmental justice conversations that were totally rejected. Totally rejected.
yeah, I'm not supposed to be political on these calls, but it just seems like the legislators